to the next generation of warfare, psychological warfare. In modern conflict, the mind is a potent weapon. Discover General Michael T. Flynn's groundbreaking guide, The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. Unlock tactics, strategies, and the mindset to navigate this cognitive battlefield that we all find ourselves in. Equip yourself against manipulation and emerge unscathed. Unleash your potential. Order now.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the AlphaWarrior Show. It is Wednesday night. It is July 29th, 2026, which means it is Operation Gladio night. We are on chapter 106, episode 580. We're going to be talking about Intertel. Going to be an interesting topic from the little cursory search that I did. But before we do that and figure out how smart we all are tonight, I do want to take a moment and get into one of these sponsors that I just started taking, probably been about 2 months now. You're going to see that QR code populate on the screen. And I'm talking about Nutronics Labs. That's nutronicslabs.com. This stuff right here, folks, Man's Edge Testosterone Booster. Listen, the military said they need to start putting some tea into our guys. And guess what? You don't have to just be in the military. This stuff's great, folks. And the great thing is when you get this Man's Edge Testosterone Booster, you're going to get this absolutely free. This is the IGF-1. This is the 300,000 nanogram one. You guys know I do the million one, but this also has the anti-aging stuff. So you don't have to age gracefully. You can stay young. If you're curious, the one I take, this is the million nanograms. This is the Maximus, right? Because that's just how we do it over here. Look, it's going to support your immune system. You're going to burn fat, especially if you're doing all your other goodies as well. It's going to help you with your cortisol levels. It's going to boost your energy and libido. You're going to see a difference. Now, granted, how out of balance your body is will kind of depend on how much of that effect you feel right away. But if you already started doing some stuff, you're going to feel an immediate effect. You're going to notice. This is not something you got to take for months and months and months to be like, is it working? You're going to know. And here's the thing. Even if you are out of shape and you go to pick up some activities, you're going to notice things where you do feel more energized. You do have faster recovery. It's good stuff. It's not just if you want to go to the gym and get all Arnold, it has a lot of great benefits for your body. And ladies, it's for you too. And they also have special formulas for you ladies that has the cranberry stuff for all that other stuff you ladies have to deal with that I'm not going to talk about because that would be awkward. But they have all that great stuff. There's stuff there to help you with your sleep, and it's from God's Pharmacy. It's not the poisonous, nasty synthetics you're going to put into your body. So, folks, if this sounds good and appealing to you and you want to do what I do, don't just talk about, I take this stuff. NutronicsLabs.com/alpha for 50% off with auto ship and then a platinum bottle of IGF-1 completely free of charge. Plus, you'll get an extra 10% when you use the code alpha. And if you're watching on a different platform, go down that description and you'll see what your promo code is on that one. So, folks, again, NutronicsLabs.com/alpha. And with that, let me bring on the person you really want to hear from tonight, Colonel. It's been an intriguing day.
Yeah, lots of blah, 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 blah.
I'm going to talk about a little bit more later on tonight on a different thing that I'll be doing. But one of the things that I was talking about on DEF CON last night, I'm trying to get my days straight. Yes, it was DEF CON last night. Was at the end of the show, me and Josh said, hey, let's just take a wild swing at some things, right? Of what might occur. And one of the things that I said is, there's a chance Fauci is going to plead the fifth. And, Josh in the audience says, but he took the pardon. I said, I completely concede that argument to you. Like, yeah. I understand. But he's going to. I go, and when he does, I go, him and his attorneys, and they're like, well, you can't bring his attorneys in. I go, he's going to. I go, it's going to turn the argument into the legitimacy of the pardons. Like, I see that this is where it's going. So I actually went and grabbed that clip and posted on Rumble. I'll be posting on social media. This is where we're
also at. Those pardons are at the federal level. He still faces charges at state level. So he can't say anything.
He's damned if he does, and he's damned
Well,
if he does,
if
which
you
he
look
should be.
if you look at everything that we've talked about, he can't talk.
No,
He will be flying out of a 7th floor window.
completely agree. If people think that he's afraid of the charges that are coming, no, he's afraid of if he even hints that he's going to talk. He knows what fate awaits him. I agree with you completely on that.
We have plenty of examples.
Yes, we do. So, Colonel,
Speaking of that,
Intertel.
so I want to set the stage. We're going to go back in time to just post Cuban Revolution. We know what was going on in Cuba under Batista and the activity of the casinos, the mafia, the CIA, and everybody trafficking narcotics through Cuba, money laundering, you name it. We had all the players there, William Polly, the United Fruit, big party going on in Cuba until Castro's revolution. So a lot of those people were scrambling around for, where do we go? Where do we put all this activity? Where we're making a killing and now we're not. So there was an immediate looking around by these people. Obviously, the best relocation would be somewhere in that same general area. And so they began looking around. There was an island off of Haiti that looks like turtle. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. That was considered. It ended up turning into basically a free zone, but they wanted something that they could control the import-export piece of the pie, everything. So basically the Bahamas became very important. At this time, they are still property of the UK. And they have a UK governor that's basically running everything. So I wanted to set that stage. During this time frame, we had the one that we looked at last week, the 3I, 5I one. It gets set up primarily by FBI and CIA people to do investigations, secret intelligence, and all that stuff. So shortly after that gets set up, there's another organization called International Intelligence Inc., nickname Intertel. It basically comes around in the early 70s, around 1970, but that's not when it first started. It actually was in operation under a different name, as we're going to find out. So when it emerges in 1970 as a private security and intelligence firm that served as a subsidiary of an entity that went through a name change, but in 1970, it was called Resorts International. It's in the Bahamas. It has casinos, hotels, basically a replacement for what they lost under Batista. So it was funded and chaired in significant part by a guy by the name of James M. Crosby. He was a long time basically serving as president chairman of Resorts International. So he decides that he'd like to have basically his own private intelligence entity. Intertel positioned itself as a specialized consultancy to shield legitimate businesses. This is what it marketed itself as: legitimate businesses from being infiltrated by organized crime. Now, this is going to be the butt of the whole show because of who they're doing business with. So they position themselves as an intelligence agency to make sure they vet all of the people, to make sure they don't get any criminals in their corporations, into whoever it is that's hiring them. All right. Now, we'll come back to that at the end. and see if they achieved that objective. So its leadership and staff drew heavily, and I do mean heavily, from all facets of the federal government. And its work ranged from casino security in the Bahamas to high-profile assignments involving Howard Hughes. So,
That's a big
what's
name
her
right there.
Well, in 1958, there's a company out of New Jersey that's called Mary Carter Paint Company. Mary Carter Paint. That sounds so legitimate, doesn't it? Nice woman's name. There is no Mary Carter, by the way. It is a paint manufacturer originally. However, it was acquired by a group of investors. It was widely known as early as the early 1960s to be a CIA front company that laundered payments to the Cuban exile army for the CIA, our Gladio. Mary Carter Paint was a front to money launder money to Operation Gladio operatives. James Crosby was the son of one of the investors. He began basically taking charge of it at a very early age. He was considered a New Jersey businessman. And he led the transformation of this family-controlled Mary Carter Paint CIA front into Resorts International. In the mid-1960s, the company acquired a majority interest in an island that was originally called Hog Island. They changed the name of Hog Island because that doesn't sound very casino-ish, resort-ish, to Paradise Island. And originally, Hog Island was bought, it's near Nassau. It was bought by an A&P heir, the grocery store, A&P. The heir to A&P's fortune was Huntington Hartfield. He sunk millions of dollars into Hog Island, trying to make it a paradise. And he kept running up against obstruction by the British overlords, because the British overlords had already decided to get in bed with Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky had already opened several casinos and resorts under basically buying off. There's a big scandal that happens. The guy that's in charge, he gets, all of it gets exposed. He has to slink out of town under all kinds of accusations. He never gets held accountable for all of the shit that he did. But so the Huntington Hartford is like scratching his head going, what's going on? Because he needed a bridge to get to the mainland in order to make it work. And they wouldn't give him any permits to build the bridge. Well, if you go back in time a little bit, I read a book it's called Bellies Up. And it talks about how from the 1930s to all the way into the 60s, that's kind of the span of the book, how in New York and New Jersey, the mafia ran basically the entire food commodity network with the mafia. The one company they could never break was A&P. A&P would never work with them on taking bribes, taking kickbacks. So I don't know what part of that carried over, because Meyer Lansky was involved in all of that as well. But they were going to ensure that this A&P heir did not succeed. Total corruption. All right. So Crosby waltzes in and buys Hog Island for pennies on the dollar from the A&P Air, Huntington, Hartford. And all at once, he not only gets a permit to build the bridge, he gets all of the gaming license that he needs. He gets everything. And the reason why he got everything is because he had already made a backroom deal with Meyer Lansky to basically use the Meyer Lansky corrupt casino operators to run the casinos that are going to be set up on the new Paradise Island. So it's going to look like it's a completely separate company, but it's not. And that's key. So he gets all of grandfathered into the gaming license because he agrees to make this deal with Meyer Lansky, and everything's good to go. So on New Year's Day, 1968, they have a huge celebration of the opening of this new Resorts International on Paradise Island. And I think if you look, you'll find out that on New Year's Day, 1968, there's a VIP that happens to visit for this grand opening day, and it's none other than Richard Nixon. So we're just going to leave that hanging there because I'm going to next week pull all those strings together. All right. So I want to go talk a little bit about this Crosby guy. He isn't just anybody. His father, John Crosby, just so happened to be an assistant attorney general for the DOJ. And he is the one that acquired a struggling New Jersey-based manufacturer called Mary Carter Paint. Now, I just told you it's a CIA front, and this guy is an assistant attorney general running a CIA front. So James gets appointed chairman at age 31. And he was the largest contributor to the 1976 campaign for legalizing gambling in New Jersey. They had fought it off successfully several times, but he greases all the right palms and finally gets it approved. He invested heavily in property and political capital before the referendum was passed. His resorts became magnets for powerful and controversial figures, including Howard Hughes, financier Robert Vesco, the Shah of Iran. And beyond casinos, Crosby made significant efforts to move into the airlines. And of course, back in the 1969 timeframe, the most used CIA carrier of commercial type was Pan American World Airlines. And don't you know that that's the airline he wanted to take over? Now, that didn't actually happen, not for lack of trying, but there was a congressional investigation into it, and it was thwarted by Congress back when we actually had a functioning Congress, at least in some aspects. Okay. So a little bit more about the history of Paradise Island, because we need to understand on Grand Bahama Island, which is the big island there was a man by the name of Wally Groves. Wally Groves was an ex-convict who had served time in prison for mail fraud because of some nefarious activities he had been involved in. He used his political connections with Sir Stanford Sands, who is basically the Bahama government for the UK government. They set up a very powerful colonial entity that was referred to as the Bay Street Boys. And basically, he served as the Minister of Tourism and Finance. And he was able to secure a thing called the Hawksbill Creek Act. Now, basically what that allowed to happen is Meyer Lansky to purchase land there through Wally Groves for pennies on the dollar. They even brought in a Canadian promoter by the name of Lou Chesler. And he and Meyer Lansky was kind of the backbone behind this whole operation, while Wally Groves served as the front man. So they build the hotel that I was talking about. They build all of the, and don't you know that if you went back and checked the roster of people that were working at this new casino that gets put on the mainland part of the Bahamas, it had all of the exact same people that had been running the casino network in Cuba. They just all moved to Bahamas. So Crosby's Paradise Island venture invited all of the Lansky crew into Resorts International to run the casinos, combined with Grove's interest before appearing to sever those ties amid public outcry that basically Paradise Island was turning into another Cuba. Now, I say it appeared like they severed ties because they actually didn't. If you go back and you check the roster of what got left behind under this supposed purge, it was some of the people's brother-in-laws who just happened to have a different name that was running all the cash operations in the cashier area. So they didn't actually purge anything. They just did this token realignment. It's still all of the same players. Okay. Early financing and associates of Resorts International and the Mary Carter Enterprise included a mix of mainstream and controversial figures. Investors and contacts range from members of the Crosby family and their in-laws, which weirdly enough included media and this huge New Jersey funeral home that was run by one of the Crosbys. And I'm sure if you're in the mafia business and a CIA front, running a funeral home comes in really, really handy. That's what I'm thinking anyway. One of those guys' name was W. Alton Jones. He was one of the most consequential early figures linked to the resort expansion. He was a close confidant of Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was also the former chairman of an entity called Cities Service Company. Jones was essentially the model for the corporate fixer. He was involved in the early Paradise Island development projects. His presence signaled that the company had establishment approval. Jones was a pillar in the American industrial intelligence complex as well. And weirdly enough, he ends up dying in a very mysterious plane crash in 1962 that no one ever figured out what the real cause was.
We know those plane crashes.
Yes, we do. Another gentleman, Irving Peterson, is very, very interesting. He was a former high-ranking Secret Service official assigned to the White House in a CIA front, mafia-ran casino. Peterson was a career Secret Service agent who eventually rose to the rank of Deputy Assistant Director. That's like either the number one or number two, or number three, number two or number three guy at all of the Secret Service in a very crucial time period. His presence at the inner circle of the Secret Service during the Nixon administration is exactly what made his hiring at Resorts International so significant. Other individuals linked were Robert Vesco. And for those of you who are not familiar with him, he would take probably 3 or 4 shows to go through all of his nefarious connections. But Robert Vesco was implicated in basically passing money to Richard Nixon. And he was considered a very close friend of Richard Nixon, at least at some point, where he actually visited him while he was president. Robert Vesco was involved in basically stealing hundreds of millions of dollars out of a company called iOS. And he was wanted by so many people in the United States that he had to hang out in Costa Rica. Now, we first ran across Robert Vesco as the guy that owned the ranch in Costa Rica that the CIA was using for the Contra runs. They were flying drugs out of his ranch and weapons into his ranch. He was deeply embedded in the CIA, DEA, and FBI operations that were going on in the 1980s out of his ranch in Costa Rica. That same guy was one of the early investors in Paradise Island. One of the most interesting ones was none other than William Mellon Hitchcock. Now, I'm sure everybody recognizes that name, and shame on you if you don't, because William Mellon Hitchcock was one of the heirs to the Mellon, Carnegie Mellon fortunes that basically provided the facilities to create LSD for the CIA. And he's here with Resorts International.
There are no coincidences.
He is the guy that was behind the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, which was the LSD network that provided the CIA all of their LSD for all of their MK Ultra experiments. That William Mellon Hitchcock is part of the investors in Resorts International. So we really haven't left anybody out at this point. All right. So there are a few good people working in the agencies in the federal government, and they set up this thing called Operation Trade Winds because they begin suspecting that these same mafia-connected people are doing what they had been doing in Cuba. So they begin this huge multi-pronged, led by the IRS, investigation in the mid-1960s into the Bahamas being not only a tax haven, money laundering, because this is when Paul Helliwell's Castle Bank is down there, money laundering for the CIA, drug trafficking, heroin network out of Thailand, all of this stuff. So there's a man by the name of Robert Peloquin, Peloquin. And he just so happens to have been the Justice Department's organized crime specialist. Where would we find him after he leaves the Justice Department? Oh, he becomes the chief of Intertel. Intertel, again, is a subsidiary wholly owned by Resorts International. And they hire, I just told you about all of the criminals that are in Resorts International. And they just so happen to hire the Justice Department's organized crime specialist to work in organized crime. Okay. In addition, when Rob, go ahead.
It is quite brilliant on picking him up too, because he had extensive experience in organized crime.
Yes.
So you want to circumvent it, then you probably want the guy that has the expertise on how you find it.
Yes. Just like the guy that we went through. I always forget his name because I remember Robert Sensei, the DEA guy that was supposed to be the guy in charge, like the deputy director for money laundering of narco money, gets arrested right after he retires for money laundering narco money. Yeah, those are the people that you want to have do that. All right, nice pattern recognition there. When Robert Peloquin founded Intertel in 1970 to serve as this corporate security arm of Crosby's Resort International. He engaged in a deliberate campaign to recruit top-tier talent out of the federal government. Peterson recruitment was viewed by many, including contemporary investigators and journalists, as a revolving door. It granted Resorts International the inside knowledge of agents that had intimate firsthand knowledge of protocols and personnel within the executive branch and Secret Service, as we've already indicated. He also was interested in hiring veterans of presidential Secret Service details, because what does the Secret Service also handle?
The fake money.
Yes, counterfeiting.
Counterfeit, yes. Thank you.
Yeah. So they work intimately with the Treasury. And if you're money laundering, that's a good thing to have. So they had firsthand knowledge of protocol. And it also allowed him to hire people who had massive recognition within the federal government, because if you're, a cop and you're investigating something and you walk into an organization that has all of these prior federal employees, back then your initial reaction would be, they can't be doing anything wrong. These guys all worked for the federal government. They know, right? Yeah. It gives you an air of credibility immediately, so people don't start looking under the pillow and under the mattress and that type of thing.
You won't even suspect it unless it's just so blatantly put in your face.
Correct. And he viewed that as an insurance policy. It's very difficult for federal regulators to aggressively investigate a company that was employing all of the same guys these investigators were just working with, right? Because they all know the same people. They go to the same cocktail parties. As a high-ranking Secret Service agent, Peterson would have possessed extensive knowledge about surveillance techniques, intelligence channels, and security vulnerabilities of where the feds would look. So the timing of Peterson's jump from the Secret Service to Intertel is worth noting. It occurred during a period when the lines between Nixon's private business associates like B.B. Rebozo, who has all kinds of weird ties, and Howard Hughes, who was a large donator to Republicans and Richard Nixon in particular. So the lines were blurred. We'll just leave it at that. Because Intertel was providing quote unquote security and intelligence for properties like Paradise Island. And Paradise Island, by the way, is not their only customer, as we're going to find out. They were frequented by political and intelligence elite. Having a man like Peterson on the payroll ensured that the company functioned as a private intelligence service that was functionally indistinguishable from state agencies where the people used to work, because they still have ties to all of those networks. Publicity generated in part from investigations like Tredwin helped discredit certain colonial and rival American gambling interests around that time. So what they're going to do now that you've got Lansky over here, and now you have this new Resorts International, they're going to turn their ire on Lansky. Right? They use Lansky and his network to get set up. So once the UK basically allows them to have an election, a guy by the name of Lyndon Pidling ends up being in charge. Now, he's already been basically bought off, and now the exposure begins of some of the mafia ties that everybody already knew existed, but they don't need them anymore. So Lansky basically has the spotlight shined on him. He kind of slinks out of town, and now Resorts International is the big game in town. And so this sidelines most of Lansky's hold on that network down there. And this was all arranged by an interesting man by the name of Edwards Bennett Williams. He sometimes went by E.B. Williams. He could be his own show, but he's a very prominent guy in this whole story. Crosby cultivated political ties that included contributions to Richard Nixon's campaign and got cozy with B.B. Rebozo, who was a good friend of Richard Nixon. And the U.S. Consul General, who eventually becomes an ambassador to the Bahamas. Well, he doesn't become an ambassador. He's a consul at Bahamas, but he eventually becomes an ambassador at a very interesting place at a very interesting time, which we'll talk about in a second. Turner B. Shelton. He's the U.S. representative consul general in the Bahamas. Allegations later surfaced of cash movements involving the toll bridge revenue. All right, so let me explain this too. So here was one of their money laundering operations. So they get the permit for the toll bridge. Well, if you're from the Bahamas, you use the Bahamian money. If you use cash, they had a separate toll box to get over to Paradise Island. All of that cash in that box was basically laundered. All they ever reported was the Bahamian money, none of the cash. That was one. And during the Tradewinds investigation, they come across one of these boxes in Resort International, and it has over $250,000 in it. So this wasn't a small enterprise. All right. Resorts consultant Seymour Alter, the guy we were already talking about, and a bank in Key Biscayne in the Florida. When these allegations were made, they made an out-of-court settlement, so nobody ever got prosecuted for what Tradewinds found. A proposed 1972 sale of Paradise Island was being negotiated with none other than Robert Vesco, the guy that stole like $300 million from iOS, wants to buy Paradise Island. But because of Tradewinds, the SEC puts a kibosh on that. So Intertel was involved in related inquiries as Operation Tradewinds. So Operation Tradewinds was actually finding dirt, and Nixon closed it down. They gave it a pause, is the right terminology. They gave it a pause long enough for them to bury all of the shit they were finding. And then it was allowed to, and I'm not kidding, there's an entire chapter of a book called Spooks that's dedicated to nothing but this Tradewinds investigation. They actually had found briefcases with incriminating documents, rosters, diaries, everything. And the Nixon administration just said, yeah, we're not going to do that right now. Because, of course, it would lead to Nixon, because Nixon's name's all over this with B.B. Rebozo, Robert Vesco, all of these people. Nixon was down there for the grand opening. So there's a convenient pause in the investigation, long enough for them to clean up their shit. And then they go, oh, okay, well, you can go ahead with that investigation. But now all of the leads were basically, and they had already killed a couple of the witnesses. And, now you can start again. So I want to talk a little bit about this Turner Blair Shelton, the consul general down there. See if you recognize any patterns. So he's a foreign service officer, which means he could be CIA because they like to hide in there. And he's best known for being the U.S. ambassador to Nicaragua from 1970 to 1975. And what was going on in Nicaragua during 70 to 75? Well, that would be when the CIA installed military dictator, Somoza, was running the show down there. And Somoza, interestingly enough, was a narco trafficker. And he is working with the CIA to kill all of the Sandinistas who are trying to overthrow his government and take their country back. And this ambassador, who was in on this whole Resorts International garbage, is in Nicaragua protecting Somoza. And by the way, Somoza loved going to Resorts International. He was a frequent visitor there because, of course, he was getting tons and tons of narco money. So,
and just considering the proximity it has to famous islands that we all look into now, I wonder about the human trafficking or child trafficking that was probably going on during that time. I don't think that this is something that is specific just to our era.
No, absolutely not. I mean, Operation Peter Pan, where they stole all those thousands of Cuban children and brought them to the United States. Definitely, this is part and parcel of these operations. He also has a really weird background. Before his diplomatic foreign service time, he worked in Hollywood film industry. Mr. Ambassador did. And he also served in the Treasury Department's film division during World War II. And by the way, that's propaganda for those of you who don't know. He later headed a film division of the U.S. Information Agency, which is a CIA front. He also helped negotiate the U.S. and Soviet Cultural Exchange Agreement in the 1950s, which was also a CIA front. So, Mr. Ambassador that's working at Resorts International isn't an independent player in this whole thing. He definitely has CIA ties. So Intertel grew out of a security arrangement with Resorts Paradise Island Casino. And I mentioned that it was set up in 1970. Crosby basically was the guy in charge, of Resorts International. And Robert Pellegrin was the guy that was running Intertel. He had a partner. That guy's name was William Hundley. He was initially the secretary and general counsel for Intertel. They had both worked at the Justice Department. As we mentioned about Pellegrin in his organized crime strike force, Hundley had a very interesting job in the DOJ too. He headed the organized crime and racketeering section.
How convenient. Seriously.
Yeah.
It's just because, I know we have a lot of new people that watch Operation Gladio and are like, what's the correlation from this? And those of you watch, you know what I say. It's the playbooks haven't changed. It's just the names, the logos, the flags, and in some situations, not even the names, because we're talking legacy families. But if you think you're Edward Snowden's, the Green Beret that blew himself up in Vegas, Matthew Livelsberg, and what he was tied into with drones and other technology. Me and Josh have talked. When you think about all these things that have happened, you're like, well, man, these sound like the stories of Operation Gladio from the past. And well, because it is.
Yes.
That's exactly what it is. And that's why it's so important to understand this. Because again, if they're pulling people from the DOJ that were the authorities and experts in organized crime and racketeering, and we know that the deep state is in operation today, then these are the people that are in Trump's circle that we got to say, okay, is this guy one of Trump's guys or not? And I'll turn it over to you right here real quick, Colonel. So one of the things that I've told people is don't listen so much to what Trump says or even what his people say, but monitor their actions, because the good guys are going to have resumes that look like the bad guys and vice versa. And so good guys that have infiltrated into these dark networks, you are not going to know they're good guys until they get the go order to facilitate the reason they infiltrated, because that's how dangerous it is for them. But that's the same thing for the.
Absolutely right.
So I'll give it back to you, Colonel.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's also interesting to note that that Pelegrin guy graduated from Georgetown University, heavily recruited by the CIA, and he was in Navy intelligence during the Korean War before he went on to work the DOJ.
I'm seeing a lot of
Yeah,
naval intelligence and Holy Cross ties to a lot of the names that you've brought up today.
yes, yes. Oh, Holy Cross. Is that Catholic? Like in the Catholic Church and Operation Gladio and money laundering? Yeah,
It is.
that same group. All right. So the firm marketed itself as a management security, and they actually were listed in the yellow pages under management consultant. Just so I saw a picture of one of their ads in the old yellow pages when I was doing this research. The services included background investigations, employee screening, protection of proprietary information, electronics countermeasures, debugging, and bugging, by the way, document authentication, computer security, industrial site surveys, and guidance on avoiding organized crime exposure in the middle of organized crime. I guess they weren't very good at that part. Contracts were often oral, no written contracts. There was no record of these guys working for the companies that they worked for. Staff numbered in the dozens and included former officials of the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, NSA, Customs and Border, DEA, State Department. They even had Scotland Yard people on their staff. There was a guy by the name of Sir Randolph Bacon who served as a director that was from Scotland Yards. They also had the Canadian Mounted Police, among others. And J. Edgar Hoover's nephew, Fred Robinette. Isn't Robinette Biden's middle name?
I'm gonna look that up. I think so.
So J. Edgar Hoover's nephew is Fred Robinette. He was a director of Intertel.
It is. Yeah, it's Robinette.
Oh, that's so interesting, isn't it? I'm sure it's a coincidence. That's just a normal Smith name, right?
Such a popular normal name.
All right. One other guy, James Golden, he also was a Secret Service agent with ties to Nixon when he was vice president during the Eisenhower administration. He also had worked at Lockheed in their top secret area. And he would also be part of not only Intertel, but he moves on to work for Hughes Summa Corporation, which we'll talk about next week. So Intertel's primary clients was Resort itself, both the casino and the property security. They also worked for Howard Hughes' interest after the billionaire abrupt 1970 departure from Las Vegas, which most people argue he was kidnapped by Intertel. We'll go into that next week and you guys can decide for yourself. I've already decided. I do believe he was kidnapped from Las Vegas and spirited out of the country for lots of reasons. Intertel personnel helped secure Hughes's properties. They investigated Hughes's right-hand man, Robert Mayhew, who was also a CIA guy, and supported the reclusive billionaire's subsequent residence in Bahamas. He also spent quite a bit of time in Nicaragua. And he was in negotiations, supposedly, in his vegetated state about building a canal across Nicaragua. And for those of you who's followed me, you know that that was the original plan, that the actual Panama Canal was going to be the Nicaraguan Canal in the late 1800s. And it was through sleight of hands by Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles that it got moved to Panama so they could bail out one of their buddies over in France at the tune of millions of dollars of taxpayer money because we had already started on the Nicaraguan canal. So they're back talking about that. But what was interesting is who was involved in the negotiations to do the Nicaraguan canal with Howard Hughes. Daniel Ludwig, the Rothschilds, was who was working on that deal. Hughes' final years and his 1976 death in transit from Acapulco raised questions about his inner circle, all of which was Intertel. And weirdly enough, there's a thing called the Mormon Mafia, which I had never heard of. And it was all of his immediate staff were from this Mormon Mafia group. We'll go into that next week. Other documented clients included the NFL. Player and ownership screening fell to Intertel.
Man, that goes back into the connection with Biden's brother and the island. And what was his name? Green, that was the head of the NFL Referees Association, but also tied in. We talked about it a while back, but I guess it doesn't change.
The Robinette guy?
I'm telling you.
So the most interesting one of their clients, although there's several, was ITT. ITT is the company that paid like $300,000 to Nixon to overthrow the government in Chile. They hired Intertel as their security guys. McDonald's used Intertel for franchise background checks. Henry Ford used them. The New York Times used them. General Motors used them, specifically with a strike-related issue, Pinkerton style, like go in and bust up the strike. That was Intertel. Various states and local governments used them. Detroit Airport used them. Rhode Island prison system used them. The Illinois governor, Otto Corner, used them. And American pharmaceutical firms use them. The Shah of Iran used them. The monarchy family of Spain used them at the exact same time when Otto Skorzeny was hanging out in Spain running Paladin. The London Daily Mail, a British MI6 affiliated, MI5 affiliated entity, used them. The New Jersey State Commission of Investigations contracted out investigations to Intertel. And I told you at the beginning of the show that Intertel was intimately involved in getting New Jersey approved for gambling. The first outside of Vegas gambling in the continental United States happened in New Jersey. So what does that mean? If Intertel is working for the New Jersey State Commission of Investigations, that means when Resort International moves into New Jersey and starts opening casinos, their intelligence agency, Intertel, works both for Resorts International and the investigators that would be investigating Resorts International. What the hell? What the hell? Is that crazy shit?
Is this the same ITT that did like the college for people to get into? Are these two different entities? Because there was a very popular like trade school that people would get into.
No, that's different. That's different.
Okay.
ITT was the World War II company that ran all of the telephone and telegraph companies. They were involved in IG Farben. They were the guy that opened ITT. I mean, that could be probably 3 shows in itself, but ITT went through tons and tons of, they're basically like the telephone and telegraph version of Crypto AG, where they did all the encrypted infiltration into all of these. Crypto AG was a company that sold devices for encryption to countries for them to use in communicating with their embassies, and there was a CIA backdoor to it. ITT is the telephone and telegraph version of crypto AG. They would go into countries like Chile, and they owned every single telephone and every single telegraph entity in Chile. And they basically were a front for the CIA, not technically in the technical sense, but they shared all of the intelligence that they gathered with the CIA. And ITT was in almost every single Latin American country. They were all over Europe. So they had basically access to every telephone phone call, every telegraph message that was sent, and a lot of communications that were done back in these days in the 50s, 60s, and 70s were all done by telegraph. If you wanted instant information exchange, you sent it by telegraph. So they had firsthand, and they used it to manipulate stocks. When they knew something was going to happen and it was being conveyed by telegram, they had inside knowledge to be able to use that from an intelligence standpoint. And Intertel is their intelligence organization. So to say they're connected would be an understatement. They also, some things that people may remember, they were hired to do the Chicago Tylenol murder investigations. They were intimately involved in that. They also were the entity, and this is why I think he was kidnapped, Howard Hughes. They were the go-to firm that used the CIA black aircraft to fly the Shah out of Iran, Intertel. They also flew the mission to remove Somoza out of Nicaragua when the Sandinistas overthrew that country. That's Intertel. Why don't we know who these people are?
Because they were that good at covering everything up and controlling everything.
Yeah. So
were that good.
Resorts International expanded into Atlantic City, which I already mentioned, after New Jersey approved that. The company acquired and renovated one of the big buildings there and opened the first legal casino outside of Nevada in 1978. And obviously, you can see from this history that Trump touches this. Trump actually bought temporarily Resorts International later on. And of course, he was involved in casinos in New Jersey, right? And we're going to talk about that next week, because I'm going to show you the two faces of this Intertel network. And I'm going to contrast President Nixon with President Trump. In what I want people to be able to see is exactly the points that you were making earlier, is that you can have exposure to these organizations without being in these organizations, because the only way you can effectively take them down is from the inside. And there is a very big difference between being in them and being around them.
100% agree with that.
Because Donald Trump, when he buys Resort International, what did that gain him access to?
The books.
Yes. It gained him access to Intertel. It gained him access to everything on the inside of that organization while he was a Democrat safe guy. Now, he only owned it for a very short period of time, and then he turned around and sold it to Merv Griffin, and then it gets sold to another entity. But he had it long enough to see the inside of it. And speaking of which, leadership eventually, after Crosby died, passed to a guy by the name of I.G. Jack Davis. And he's actually very interesting as well. He was involved in the whole Atlantic City gambling initiative. And of course, he was involved in World War II as well, and a Harvard business associate, graduate, sorry. And he was the one that sold the controlling interest in Resorts International to Donald Trump. So for that reason, he's interesting. It eventually basically gets the controlling interest gets bought up by, but it is touted in people doing this type of research as a case study in the privatization of intelligence skills and the melding, basically the graying of the government with these private intelligence organizations. By hiring all of that network, they basically become that network.
Yeah, it shows, it brings up Merv Griffin and all that. There's something interesting.
Yeah.
Entanglements here. It's I'm pretty interested in what this is going to look like on the next one when you put this together. I found the IG Jack Davis. It's an article written in 2017. Dies at 92, but there's a brief part in here, kind of to what you were saying right now. It says later in 1987, Davis secured a deal with now President Donald Trump to buy controlling interests in resorts and left the company. The deal continued Trump's controversial tenure in Atlantic City, in which he sold resorts to entertainer Merv Griffin, but retained control of former Trump Taj Mahal Casino, then being constructed by Resorts. When the casino faltered on its opening in 1990, briefly being closed by the New Jersey Casino Control Commission, Trump hired Davis as president of the casino, who then turned the property around. That's all connections. That's all it is. When you see that it says that New Jersey Casino Control Commission came after him, yeah, because they didn't like the business of what was going on. It ain't got nothing to do with money. They didn't like the business. So Trump brings a guy that's in that network to make the deals and these things happen.
Which is exactly what happened when Resorts International moved into the Bahamas. They got Lansky, who was already on the inside, to extend his exemption over to Paradise Island. They were able to get in, and then they burned Lansky.
It is wild. I went and pulled up some things real quick. One day we gotta do a show on these guys or see if they're incorporated. So let me bring up this guy's photo here. And this is something I shared a few years ago with when the Colonel was on. This was not too long before I got raided by the FBI's. Who knows whatever those motivations were. But this is Scott Green. We talked about him a few moments ago. Former American football official in the National Football League, and he was the head of the NFL Referees Association. Well, why is that matter? Because let's just read this little part here in the second paragraph. Outside his part-time work in professional football, Green works as a Washington, D.C. contractor for public safety and criminal justice agencies as part of a firm he co-founded in 1994. Green announced his retirement at the conclusion of the 2013 football season. Well, what's that firm? Well, that firm would be this one, the Lafayette Group. And when you go to their current hour team, the chief executive officer, CEO, is a guy by the name of Keel Green. Family? Maybe. Right? But why is this Lafayette Group? Why is this thing important? Well, let's just read a little bit, because this is also Gladio. I mean, it's crazy. Let me make this a little bit bigger for people to see. It says, I won't read the whole thing, but founded in 1994, Lafayette Group Incorporated has more than 30 years of experience in managing a comprehensive portfolio of U.S. government programs, primarily supporting public safety, emergency management, cybersecurity, and risk management efforts. We draw on our diverse team of professionals with backgrounds in law enforcement, emergency communications, organizational strategy, information security, critical infrastructure protection, and more, who bring on-the-ground knowledge and experience, including a lot of the software that we use in law enforcement and our borders. Now, why does all that matter? Well, again, we go to Scott Green. And what matters about Scott Green? Well, let me read this little part to you guys. James Biden, so this is Joe Biden, former President Joe Biden's brother. James Biden and Scott Green are connected through a 2006 real estate transaction, and Green's prior work as a Senate staffer for who was Green, this NFL guy that says was a contractor in DC. Who was he a staffer for? Senator Joe Biden. Now, why is all that interesting? Because the island that was purchased, this is what went down in that. In 2006, James Biden, brother of Joe Biden, sold a parcel of land on Water Island in the U.S. Virgin Islands to lobbyist Scott Green and his wife for $150,000. James had originally purchased a larger 1-acre plot there for $150,000. Now, when you dive into this island, which is very close to another island we all talk about, guess what this island also has? Underground, former military submarine infrastructure. And there's so much going in there. So again, you got Joe Biden, you got his brother James Biden, you have these guys. I mean, it's all these connections. The NFL Referees Association, the head of the NFL was a staffer for Joe Biden when he was a senator. Why does that matter? Think about, what did the NFL do? BLM flags, the fist, all that propaganda. Like these connections are in play. It's the modern day version of Operation Gladio that never ended.
So when I mentioned earlier a guy by the name of Edward Bennett Williams during the whole presentation, he's referred to as a Washington super lawyer. Well, Williams, in his later years, becomes one of Washington's most powerful political figures, earning upwards of $1 million per year as an attorney while serving as the president of Washington Redskins football.
Jesus.
He also, weirdly enough, if you can figure out why the president of the Washington Redskins football team would also be a member of the Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board.
And now, listen, I'm not going to accuse any teams of anything, but what I'm going to say is, Colonel, don't these professional teams charter private flights?
Lots of them.
And didn't the NFL open it up to international games?
Yes. And this Williams guy was a real estate magnate of the first order. He shared an office building with Intertel. Now think about what I just said. Edward Bennett Williams, president of the Washington Redskins team, sitting on the Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board to the president, shared an office with Intertel in Washington, D.C.
I don't believe in coincidences. Not a chance.
Yeah.
I know those. I know this particular episode ain't gonna it's gonna make some people upset. Colonel, you kind of teased on what we're going to be hearing about next week, but what do you have going on the rest of the week, and where can this audience find you and listen to more Gladio?
So we're starting I just finished up the book that we've been doing, The Great Heroin Coup, at 4:00. I have parts of the book called Spooks that I found some very interesting Gladio information embedded in it that brought an Intertel and the Three Eyes private intelligence company to my attention. So there is a couple of chapters in there that I want to cover. We're going to do that for the rest of the week, but I show up at 4:00 on Spaces and Rumble, and that's Eastern time. And that's pretty much where you can find me every day.
And if you're driving, don't worry about writing it down. If you go down in the description following the show, you'll find all the links to the Colonel, including the first link you're going to stumble upon, which will be to get yourself some Operation Gladio merch, which is some pretty cool stuff. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to get to the last Rumble sponsor that we have here, and then we'll be signing off, folks. You're going to see a QR code populate right over my face, because there's no way I'm covering the Colonel's face. If you got a dog at home, you already know that they're more than just a pet. They're part of the family. They're your best friend. Well, it turns out America's founding fathers felt the exact same way. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and several of the men who helped build this country all had loyal dogs by their side. Some even traveled with them during the Revolutionary War and were there for some incredible moments in American history. When I found that out, I thought that's actually a really cool way to get kids interested in history. And it turns out a company called The Kid's Guide is already doing this. They have a guide called The Kid's Guide to the Founders' Furry Friends, and it shares the true stories of remarkable dogs that belong to America's founders. It's beautifully illustrated, easy for kids to enjoy, and it teaches them about the people who shaped our country through the stories of their companions they love most. So let's be honest, getting kids excited about history isn't always easy, but tell them that they're about to learn about George Washington's dog, and now you got their attention. I thought it was a genuinely clever idea, and if you've got kids or even grandkids who love dogs, I think they'll have a lot of fun with it too. They're running a special offer right now that includes the Kid's Guide to the Founders' Furry Friends and some other freebies. If it sounds like something your family would enjoy, just head over to freeusadoggift.com. That's freeusadoggift.com, and you will see those links down in the description if you're watching the replay. Colonel, it has been awesome. Very interested in hearing, especially if we dive a little bit more into the Trump stuff next week. Any final words from you?
Nope. That's it.
Right. Oh,
have a nice weekend.
we do have we have Rumble Rant super chats. Almost forgot.
Okay. Let's do it.
Dollar for dollar from G Fontes 119. Yes, Joseph Robinette Biden, name for Joe's mother, maiden name, fact. So thank you for that. And then we had some super chats that came in right here.
Okay,
Dwayne,
hold on. Somebody that's good in genealogy needs to put them Robinette names together.
that would be. Make sure you own some steel and freedom seeds too. just saying. 400 joules with the eagle coming from Dwayne. Thank you for that. And then another one, 200 joules, sunshine. And then last one, but definitely not least, Nalia Hatu 9137. My apologies if I didn't say that correctly. 400 joules eagle. And so there we have it, folks. If you didn't do so already, smash the thumb, hit the heart, leave a comment, share this out. We'll catch you guys tomorrow night on Overwatch and The Guardian and all the different Badlands stuff that I do. Good night. God bless. And Semper Fi.